Today we have Nigel Robinson, who's visited us a couple of times actually over the last two or 3 years. So I'm pleased he's come along again today to update us on the latest results and happenings at Central Asia Metals, and I'll pick up later. So welcome, Nigel, and I'll see you at the Q&A at the end of your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike, and thanks to everybody for allowing me some time on this winter's day, just to update you on what's happening at Central Asia Metals PLC. Next slide, please, Pavlina. The usual disclaimer, and then if we just move on to the next slide with a few facts and figures, just to emphasize that on Sunday, the 6th of November, we actually celebrated 5 years of owning the SASA mine in North Macedonia. And this slide is just showing you the two countries in which we operate. So we operate in North Macedonia, just north of Greece. That's the SASA underground zinc and lead mine. As I say, we've owned this now for 5 years. We bought it for $402.5 million back in November 2017. And we'll talk more about our development of that SASA mine shortly. Production actually commenced at the mine back in 1960, so it's had a long history, a long life. And we now have a life of mine that we believe will extend out to at least 2037 on the current reserves and resources. Our 2021 production numbers were just north of 22,000 tonnes of zinc and 27,000 tonnes of lead. And our guidance for this year is between 20 to 22,000 tonnes of zinc and 27 to 29,000 tonnes of lead in concentrate. Our first project that we ever developed was in Kazakhstan. As you can see there, a huge country, significantly larger than North Macedonia, both in terms of population and in GDP per capita. Very different operation as well. This is a copper producing facility. It's what's known as an in situ dump leach, and it has what's known also as an SXEW processing facility. That stands for solvent extraction electrowinning facility, and it's in central Kazakhstan. It's about 700 kilometers north of Almaty and about 700 kilometers south of the town known as Nur-Sultan, the two main cities in Kazakhstan. It's been in production now for over 10 years, and we have a life of mine there out to 2034. And in 2021, our production was just north of 14,000 tonnes of pure cathode copper. And this year, we're guiding between 13,500 to 14,000 tonnes of copper. Next slide, please. Just a few highlights. We announced our interim results back in September, and there's some good numbers that you can see here. First of all, the standout number in terms of financials is a dividend we announced for the first half of this year of 10 pence. That was a record interim dividend, up from 8 pence in 2021, on the back of very strong metal prices that we experienced in the first half of this year. It was a record first half for us, both in terms of our cash generation, the EBITDA from the revenue, and you can see the numbers there in the blue circles. So we generated nearly $120 million of revenue in the first half, and that created nearly $75 million of EBITDA, a margin of around about 63%. Key number for us there is the free cash flow from that EBITDA number, and that was a record again for us in the first half of this year, just north of $50 million. And it's that number that we use as the basis for paying dividends back to shareholders, and we pay back 30 to 50% of that number back to our shareholders, and more about that later on as well. We have now fully repaid the debt that we took on to acquire SASA 5 years ago. That was around about $187 million, and it's all been fully repaid in August. So we are now debt free. In terms of sustainability and the focus that a lot of businesses these days have on sustainability and climate change, we published our third sustainability report in 2021 in April of this year. And we also published a climate change report, which is for the company of our size. I think we're certainly punching above our weight in some of our sustainability reporting and some of the activities, which again, I'll come on to later on in terms of sustainability, setting targets for things like greenhouse gas emissions, water management, waste management, and also gender diversity across the sites. We've also agreed to construct a solar power plant in Kazakhstan, and again, more of that later. Over at Macedonia at the SASA project, the cut and fill project is now well on schedule, and we've started construction of that project in September of this year on site. And we're on track to complete the paste backfill plant by the first half of next year, and then the dry stack tailings plant in the second half of next year. Just a few facts and figures there on the production for the first 9 months. As I say, these are interim financial numbers, but they are 9 months of production numbers. And as you can see there, copper at Kazakhstan was 10,685 tons in the first 9 months. Zinc was 16,211, and lead was 20,726 tons, putting us well on track to achieve those guidance numbers I mentioned before. And just the last point, really, just to emphasize, we are celebrating a couple of anniversaries this year. In April of this year, we celebrated 10 years in production at KOUNRAD, and last Sunday, we celebrated 5 years of ownership of SASA. Next slide, please, sir. So what is our purpose in life? Why are we here? What are we doing? Our purpose really is to produce base metals which are essential for modern living, profitably and in a safe and sustainable environment. And that feeds through to everything we do in the business. Our purpose then feeds into our values, our strategic objectives, some of which are focused primarily on sustainability issues, others on more financially related issues like low cost and high margin operations, and ensuring that the money that we make from those operations is allocated properly and efficiently to grow the business. Our long-term strategic objectives is to deliver growth for our shareholders, and we measure that success both through our KPIs that management are rewarded upon and remunerated against, and also we have a fairly well-developed risk management process that goes through the audit committee to make sure that we're monitoring any risks associated with the business. And the beneficiaries of all this is the stakeholders, not just the shareholders, but a wider group of stakeholders, employees, communities, investors, governments, and suppliers across the patch, benefiting from the work that we do in producing those base metals. Next slide, please. If you look at our sustainability framework, we spent quite a lot of time developing this, and we've got 5 key pillars that we focus on in terms of delivering on sustainability initiatives. The first one is delivering value through stewardship and good governance. The second one is maintaining good health and safety practices at our sites. Focusing on our people is the third one, which is their well-being and developing those people that are involved in the business. Caring for the environment is a fundamental aspect of our sustainability work. And last but by no means least, unlocking the value for our communities in the areas in which we operate. And that feeds through all the way to these related United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, as you can see there from the icons, and also into the material topics that we focus on a day-to-day basis to improve our sustainability credentials. Next slide, please. We have set some objective targets in terms of sustainability. And if you look on the left-hand side of that table there, you can see the 5 pillars that I mentioned a minute ago. So delivering value through stewardship, we have a focus and a long-term target that we have 0 human rights abuses. Maintaining health and safety, clearly an objective is 0 fatalities, and improving our group lost time injury frequency rate, known as LTIFR, which is the number of incidents per million man-hours worked, and trying to improve that year upon year. Last year, we had a number of 1.69, and we're looking to improve upon that this year. We have targets set for our people, for developing those people, and also for diversity, increasing the number of females into our business, both in management positions and in the workforce. And then caring for the environment. We've worked hard at this to make sure that we've got some objective and quantitative targets. So we have committed to a 50% reduction in our group greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and also to be net zero by 2050. We've also committed to a 75% reduction in the surface water abstraction at SASA by the end of 2026, and a 70% improvement of the way we manage tailings on site at SASA to do it in a more environmentally responsible manner with paste backfill and dry stack tailings. We'll be reporting our Scope 3 emissions in 2024, and we'll also be reporting to the global industry standard on tailings management in 2024, something that is a real focus in the mining industry and how one manages waste on site. And again, last but by no means least, unlocking values for communities. We commit at the moment 0.25% of our gross revenue to foundations that we have within the communities to actually do development work with the communities and contribute to charitable and good causes. We are looking at increasing that to 0.5% of our group gross revenue to increase the number of projects and the sustainability of those projects. Next slide, please. I've just mentioned it there, unlocking value for our communities. Just a few examples here, and I won't talk to each particular one, but on the left is the SASA Foundation. And at both sites, both at KOUNRAD and SASA, we've created an independent legal entity, which is a charitable entity that we put that money into, and the money rolls forward if we don't find specific projects to spend the money on in any one particular year. And these, an example of SASA Foundation will be the Prime Point company that we worked with recently to develop local environmental action plans and local development plans for the economy in that area. Workshops, and you can see tuition fees in Balkash and a number of projects that we work on locally with the community. We're also contributing within each of the countries that we operate to the economic growth of the communities. And we try and source local suppliers wherever we can. And you can see the numbers there of how much we spent with local suppliers, both in Kazakhstan and in North Macedonia in the past year or so. And also we look for local employment, trying to employ people locally as opposed to employing expats. We do, of course, have some expatriate workers at, in particular, SASA, but at KOUNRAD, it's 100% local employment in the area from staff that we have trained through our own resources to be able to manage that plant and manage the operations for us. And that will be the intention at SASA in the longer term. Next slide, please. So moving on to the operations, KOUNRAD, many of you on the call will probably recognize this picture. It's an aerial view of the open pit mine at KOUNRAD, and to the right and down to the left and the south there, you can see the waste ore that was dumped on the surface all the way since 1936 when the mine was initially mined. So we have the eastern dumps and the western dumps, and you can see from the table there that we estimate in theory that we have about 119,000 tons of recoverable copper still to go for. More or less exhausted at the east, about 7,000 tons left where we started initially, and about 112,000 tons estimated at the western dumps. And you can see the location of our SXEW plant, and just to remind you, that's solvent extraction electrowinning plant by the eastern dumps. And that plant processes all the what we call pregnant leach solution from the irrigation of the dumps to produce the pure cathode copper. And the process itself is annotated there on the little icons there. We irrigate the dumps, we collect the solution with the copper in it, we then put it through the SXEW plant to create pure cathode copper, around about 14,000 tons every year, which we then use an off-taker to ship out to the various markets that we sell the copper to. And the next slide. Just a few facts and figures over production. It is seasonal, sorry. So it does get very cold in the winter. But as you can see from the chart on the right-hand side at the top there, we produce copper throughout the year, more in the summer in Q2 and Q3 than Q1 and Q4 in the cold winters. But we have been producing it all the time throughout the time we've operated from April 2012. And we're close to 140,000 tons now of copper that we've produced. I've mentioned the guidance for this year. It's 13,500 to 14,000 tons. And just a slight difference between the dumps areas. The eastern dumps tend to be slightly lower. They are what we used to call oxidic dumps with an average leach time around about 12 months. And our estimated copper recovery rate is about 45 to 50%. Whereas on the western dumps, sulfidic dumps, as they were annotated originally, but a lot of that material has oxidized over time. We have a longer average leach time around about 20 months and an average copper recovery there that we plan on of 35 to 42%. And a typical leach curve is shown there on the bottom right-hand chart. And the next slide, please. Just looking at the cost, which is pretty unique for this operation. And as I said before, it is an in situ dump leach project. So we don't move any of the ore around, and therefore we are extremely low cost. The numbers there you can see on the table to the right-hand side, just a breakdown between reagents, power, payroll, materials, giving an overall on-site cost base in the first half of this year of $9.2 million. Up from around about $7.9 million in the first half of 2021. As many mining businesses, in fact, businesses throughout the world are experiencing, we are experiencing inflation in country. Inflation in Kazakhstan at the moment is running around about 18%. But as you can see there, that's only about a 15% increase to our unit cost. It's gone up from about 57 cents per pound of copper to about 63 cents per pound of copper. And just to put that into context, that is around about $1,400 per ton of copper, and copper is selling today at around about $7,500 per ton. There's a breakdown there of the on the pie chart of where those costs are allocated to realization, G&A, and processing. And you can see a very healthy and strong EBITDA margin. So the EBITDA over the revenue we generate, close to 79%. And the next slide, please. Last but by no means least, on KOUNRAD, we have committed at board level to building a solar power plant. It's not the biggest solar power plant in the world. It's only around about 4.77 megawatts, but that will provide around about 16 to 18% of KOUNRAD's electrical power requirements. And it will reduce our scope 1 and scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions on site by about 10% against 2020. One of the reasons why it is that size, and we are future-proofing it such that we could build it larger in the future, is because of various regulations in Kazakhstan in terms of the size of solar power plant that you can have to directly feed into the plant. If it was much bigger, we'd have to feed into the national grid. It becomes slightly more complicated and bureaucratic to manage the whole process. So this is a starter project for us on solar power, and it will enable us to get to our goal, as I mentioned before, of a 50% reduction in the group greenhouse gas emissions. And this will contribute around about at group level 6 or 7% of that reduction. We have started work on this. We have started flattening the area close to the SXEW plant where the solar power plant will be, and we'll be building it next year with the intention of completing it in the second half of 2023. Next slide, please. And so moving on to SASA, a zinc and lead mine. As I mentioned before, it's our 5-year anniversary on Sunday of owning this mine that we paid $402.5 million for back in November 2017. This is a very different operation. It's a more traditional underground mine. It's in North Macedonia, as I say. We currently have a sub-level caving method of mining, which we are transitioning over the next 2 to 3 years to cut and fill stoping, and we'll be starting that transition next year. Reserves and resources are out to 2037, and the EBITDA that we've generated from this operation since we acquired it 5 years ago is just north of $280 million. And as I said before, all the debt that we took on at the time to acquire it, around about $187 million, has now been fully repaid. Next slide, please. Just a few production numbers there. You can see the 9 months out to 2022 puts us on track for our guidance this year of ore mined between 790 and 810,000 tonnes, and zinc in concentrate of 20 to 22,000 tonnes, and lead 27 to 29,000 tonnes. Grades holding fairly steady, if not slightly increased between the 2 years, 2021 to 2022, as is the zinc recovery and the lead recovery through the process plant, holding up pretty well there. And we're on track, as I say, to meet our production guidance. Next slide. Again, slide on the costs. What are the costs? Slightly more expensive operation. It's more involved. There's more people. We operate about 700 people on site at SASA, where it's about 300 at KOUNRAD. And our C1 cash cost in zinc terms is 71 cents per pound, up from around about 59 cents per pound in the equivalent period for 2021. It's not quite as easy measuring the C1 cash cost for zinc as it is for copper, because this particular operation, we have both zinc and lead. And the way we manage those unit costs is by prorating the cost base depending on the net smelter revenue. And what we found this year is the zinc price relative to the lead price has increased, and that has caused quite a significant impact on that increase in the unit costs. As you can see from the second line on the table there, the pro rata of cost to zinc has increased period on period from 42% to 48% because of those increases in the relative prices, selling prices, should I say, of zinc and lead. Probably a more informative number in terms of what's the inflationary pressures we're experiencing is looking at the total site-based operating costs. You can see there that comparable period to period, it's increased by about $1.1 million on site. This particular product, which is a concentrate product for zinc and lead, then has to go through realization costs through going through a smelter, and they're fairly significant costs for the operation. You can see just at the bottom penultimate row there, realization costs. We've had a benefit this year. They've reduced from $12.1 million down to $10.1 million with the treatment charges globally that influence the amount that we pay at the smelters that we send our products to. So overall, on the bottom line, despite the absolute cost going from $29.3 million down to $28.4 million, the unit cost has actually increased, which sounds a bit perverse, but it's because more of the costs were allocated to zinc in this particular period because of the selling prices. But still a very strong EBITDA margin, as you can see there, 60% in the first half of this year. And there's a box there explaining the change in the 12 cents per pound of cost increase. And the next slide, please, Pavlina. So I mentioned before the cut and fill project. When we took the mine over 5 years ago, we spent quite a bit of time assessing how it was operated. It'd been operated very well, had a very strong track record of production and consistent production. But as a new owner, we wanted to see whether we could do things better, whether there are any constrictions moving forward. And one of the things we quite quickly found was that the method of mining was not particularly suitable over the next 10 to 15 years. And therefore, we instigated a life of mine review. We decided at board level in August 2020 that we would transfer eventually to a cut and fill method, which is a method of mining which is still a bulk method of mining, but it's more accurate, will generate more metal for the amount of ore that you mine. Generally, it gets safer the lower you go because of the geotechnical stresses. You do not need to leave the pillars. You don't need to work under unsupported ground on any occasion. And a key factor in our decision was the management of the waste. As you can see at the bottom of the slide here, there's an aerial photograph of the mine itself in a fairly steep valley at about 1,100 meters above sea level. And as you work your way up the valley, you can see the areas that are the tailings facilities, and it gets quite tight. So management of waste is a key factor for us. And one of the benefits of cut and fill mining is that we'll be able to put almost 50% of the waste back into the voids that we've created from the mining in the first place. About 30% will go in the form of dry stack tailings, which is a very environmentally friendly way of managing your waste, whereby you squeeze more moisture out of those tailings and place them on surface in a cake form. And the balance will go into our current TSF4 facility, which will extend the life of that facility out to the end of the life of the mine, and therefore thereby facilitate us not having to create another wet dam facility further downstream where it gets quite tight and there are a number of dwellings. So there's a number of benefits of moving to cut and fill. The development of a new decline was also incorporated into those decisions. That has commenced. We've now done 1,219 meters of that decline, both from the 910 level underground and also on the surface. And those two tunnels will meet halfway through next year. And in total, we'll be doing a decline, which is a wider tunnel. Current tunnels in the mine itself are around about 3.5 meters by 3.5 meters. This is 4.5 meters by 4.5 meters, and will eventually be 4 kilometers long and going right down to the 750 below above sea level, which is around about 2024 when we'll get down there. And we'll make ventilation easier, and we'll make access into the ore body a lot easier and a lot more efficient. So the new decline is there. The paste backfill plant for the paste that I mentioned before is now under construction. Earthworks have commenced. Pouring of concrete has commenced on site. The construction of a service culvert from the flotation plant has also commenced. And the installation of the reticulation pipes, basically the pipe work to take the paste down into the underground voids, has also commenced. So well under track with the paste backfill plant. And the last part of the jigsaw with the cut and fill project is the dry stack tailings. We now know a lot more about it. We know where we're going to stack those dry stack, that dry stack cake effectively. And we have the area highlighted. You can see it on that yellow triangle on the old TSF1 and TSF2. And the design work for the landform and also the plant has been completed. And that project will start construction next year with the intention of completing it in H2 2023. Next slide, please. So 5 years at SASA, it's been an exciting journey. It's been a very rewarding journey as well, both with the people, developing the site, and working with the local community, which we've thoroughly enjoyed at the CAML Group. And since acquiring that operation back in November 2017, there's some facts and figures that you can see there, how many people we've employed, how much we've contributed to the local development projects, $1.7 million. We've generated significant revenues and taxes for the country. And we're committed to specific SASA-related sustainability targets that I mentioned before in terms of waste management and greenhouse gas emission reductions. Next slide, please. So coming on to our capital allocation priorities at a corporate level, what do we do with the money that we generate, which is interesting to most of our shareholders? We've deleveraged completely. We've paid off all the debt. The right-hand waterfall chart there will show you we've paid off religiously $3.2 million of capital every month since we took that debt on 5 years ago. That is now fully repaid. On the left-hand side, whilst repaying that debt, we've managed to maintain a healthy dividend policy. Just to reiterate, that is 30 to 50% of the free cash flow from the two operations we've talked about. And we've now paid back to shareholders $277.3 million, or 142 pence per share. So those are two of the capital allocation priorities. If we just go to the next slide, please. Pavlina, if we could just go to the next slide. Thanks very much. Other capital allocation priorities, delivering growth. And this comes in two forms, really. One, the projects that I mentioned before, both at KOUNRAD and at SASA in terms of sustaining capital, and more particularly the capital we're expending at SASA to extend the life of mine and change the mining method, but also growing the business, which is very opportunistic. We're constantly looking at opportunities out there for business development. There's a pyramid there. You can see the number of NDAs that we've signed in the first half of this year alone, and the opportunities that we've reviewed. And lots of things come into our thinking as to how we grow our current business. Sustainability aspects have taken a bit more of a forefront. Country risk is clearly something that's very topical at the moment, given everything that's going on in the world. Energy usage is topical, water usage, all the aspects of sustainability that we're focusing on both at KOUNRAD and SASA are important to us when we look at potential opportunities out there to grow the business. And then there's the traditional things of looking at which geographies and jurisdictions are we interested in. We are focusing primarily on European time zones, plus obviously we operate in Kazakhstan and we're comfortable with operating in that country. The stage of development comes into our thought processes. Now, having paid fully down all the debt, we believe we can look at things and finance early stage exploration or projects through our own balance sheet, as well as taking on either development projects or production projects. But each one will be assessed on its own merits on a case-by-case basis, looking at how it's financed, how will it impact our dividend policy, how will it impact shareholder accretion. Attractive commodity exposure, I said before what our purpose was, and that's base metals for essential for modern day living. That's not just copper, it's not just zinc. We will look at other base metals, but our preferred metal is copper and zinc, and those are the two metals that we produce together with lead at SASA and KOUNRAD. We have got a strong balance sheet, and we have no debt on it now, so we have capacity, having established good banking relationships, to actually take more debt on for the acquisition of the right opportunity. But as I said before, it will always be opportunistic, and we always look at each one on a case-by-case basis to make sure that we enhance the business and it's accretive for shareholders. Next slide, please. And so, in summary, really, and finally, our final slide from me before I open it up to any questions, we have got a strong, sustainable business. We're strong operationally. We've got a strong financial performance. We've had a record first half of this year. Metal prices, I have to say, have come off a little bit from the first half of the year, and we're dealing with that. And we aren't immune to inflationary pressures, as no businesses are in this current environment. So, but we are still very strong, strongly cash generative, and we're on the back of a very strong first half of the year in terms of EBITDA. We have fairly rigorous capital allocation priorities. We paid a strong dividend for the first half of this year. We're on track to deliver the cut and fill project next year. We're looking for growth opportunities, as I just mentioned a minute ago, and our corporate debt is fully repaid. And on the outlook, we're on track for our production guidance, and we are dealing and managing with the cost inflation as best we can, as everybody else is. And the KOUNRAD solar power plant is something which we'll start constructing next year, and it has started in terms of the earthworks and the ordering of materials. On that point, I'll end my presentation and open the floor up to any questions.
Right, thank you very much for that, Nigel. Just a reminder to everybody, if you want to ask any questions, just click on the Q&A box and type away, and we shall go through them. At the moment, there's only one, so Robert Meadows gets in first mover advantage. I think you already answered this one, actually, or the first part of it. What is your current cost of production per ton, and what % of the copper price is this, and how do you see this developing going forward? I think you mentioned around 20% is cost of production versus the cost of selling price, was it?
Yeah, Robert. I mean, in terms of copper, our cost of production, what we term as the C1 cash cost of production, is about $1,400 per ton, as I mentioned before. So mining's a nightmare for this. They'll say cents per pound or dollars per ton, and you have to, you know, jump around, do mental arithmetic basically. But that's about $1,400 per ton, and prices for copper are nearly always quoted in dollars per ton primarily. Certainly in my language they are, and I think we're around about $7,500 per ton at the moment. So that's about 20%, isn't it? Something like that. As you can see from the very healthy EBITDA margins. And likewise, when you go to, it is more complicated on zinc and lead because you've got what you call a polymetallic mine. Therefore, you have to allocate the cost depending on the net smelter revenues for zinc or lead. We could report a unit cost of lead production, but we actually focus it on it as a zinc mine. Therefore, we call it a unit cost of zinc, and you allocate the costs. And that before, as I said, was I think I said 71 cents per pound. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but again, that's taking it to dollars per ton. So I'm a little bit more accurate on this. That's around about $1,550 per ton, and zinc at the moment is close to $3,000 per ton. So again, you know, a pretty good healthy margin on that, and maybe that's more in terms of percentage of the actual selling price, but it's probably around about 50% of that selling price.
Forgive me, I haven't looked it up, or I maybe missed it in your presentation. Roughly, how much of your revenue today comes from Kazakhstan and how much from Macedonia?
Yeah, it's around about half from Kazakhstan and
half and half. Okay.
Yeah, it's about 50-50, something like that.
Okay, Robert would also like to know, how do you see this developing going forward? I'm assuming in that regard he means cost of production per ton at both mines, rather than the market price for the materials, which is always anybody's guess, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, listen, as I said several times in the presentation, Robert, we're not immune to inflation. We're probably encountering inflation anywhere between 10 to 15% at the sites. So the cost will increase. But what you'll probably find in the industry is that the actual selling price of the metals will increase. There will be a lag, I suspect, and we will see an increase in our costs in the second half. Obviously, I don't have the numbers yet, and we'll report our second half and full year results for 2022 in April of next year or March of next year. But we are seeing increases. The main area of increase, I have to say, is SASA, North Macedonia, where electricity prices, as you've read about probably in the whole of Europe, have increased quite significantly. We're trying to manage that as best we can. And I think it is manageable because there's no one particular cost at either operation that would blow the low cost nature of our operations out of the water. For example, KOUNRAD is well within the lowest decile of cost operators in copper producers in the world. And we know that SASA is on the cusp of the lowest quartile. So we are a low cost producer. And even with cost inflation, we will remain a low cost producer. And that's the key point from our point of view, in terms of we don't have any debt and we're a very low cost producer. We are a price taker, unfortunately, in the markets that we operate. I mean, the copper market itself is about 22 million tons per annum, and we're doing 14,000 tons. So we're a very small player in a big market. And the zinc market itself is around about 10,000 tons, I believe, 10 million tons, should I say, and we're producing 20,000 tons. So in all those markets, we are a price taker, but the key to success is being a low cost operator.
Now, and going forward, are you likely to see any change in quality of the products you're putting out of both locations that might affect price? Or
No, not at all, Matt. I can say that with confidence. We know the quality of the products. I mean, certainly the quality in terms of cathode purity at KOUNRAD for the copper is 99.998%, and has to be with our offtake terms and conditions, you know. But it's very pure, high quality cathode copper, and we could sell that every day, to be honest with you. It's more complicated, the route to market for zinc and lead, because you have to go via contracts with smelters. And, you know, you have to assess the different levels of what we call deleterious products within that. But we have got what's known as quite a high quality concentrate that they mix in the smelters with other concentrates from other mines around the world. We know from feedback that it's a high quality concentrate that we've got.
Okay, thank you. And just while we're on the subject then of costs in general, I mean, a couple of things that strike me is your sustainability program, which is good to see. But you know, sustainability, there is a cost associated with it, and obviously some benefits as well if you get it right. What is it going to do to your CapEx program in the next few years? You've already spending circa 5 million on the solar panels. Now that obviously, I assume, is going to pay back in terms of savings on power costs going forward. So it's going to do something on the bottom line, presumably, that's helpful. But there's a whole range of other stuff you're planning to do there. In general, what are you looking at in terms of CapEx for that program over the next few years? And then what is it likely to do to your operating margins?
Yeah. Well, let's stick in with the CapEx first. I've got to be honest with you and say that the solar farm in Kazakhstan is more our attempt to be as green as we possibly can for our investors and shareholders in Kazakhstan. As you know, Kazakhstan is very much fossil fuel and all the grid is coal-fired. So we do enjoy, we are looking, we benefit from very low-cost coal-fired electricity effectively.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you do it on a kind of NPV projected cash flow basis, it's probably only break even. I know solar farms are and the current price of electricity in Western Europe are very profitable. And it isn't an expensive operation to run. It needs very few people and whatever. But it's in terms of its profitability, we did not take that decision on a commercial basis for it to be profitable. It's more washing its face, and it's more or less break even over the life of mine at KOUNRAD. And therefore it's more our investment in being a green and sustainable company. In North Macedonia, with the contribution to our 30% our target of 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, we've been fortunate. We've managed to sign a contract with the electricity supplier at a very, very small premium to the electricity price, which is a separate issue, which gives us 100% renewable energy. There's a lot of hydroelectricity in North Macedonia, so we have that, and so we are looking at a solar farm potentially in North Macedonia, but it's not being driven by a commercial or a green kind of agenda. If I'm honest, we already have 100% renewable energy in North Macedonia, and the other green initiatives and sustainable initiatives. So many of them are just coming out through the SASA Life of Mine project. In the cut and fill. And in the improvement in water management and waste management, which are environmentally more friendly, also help us with the longevity of that mine effectively. So the CapEx program for it, we quoted $18 to $19 million initially when we started that project about 18 months ago, and we forecast another $10 million of CapEx. We'll obviously be updating those numbers in the full year results next year. So that's the kind of capital costs of doing that cut and fill project effectively. You could view it as a green initiative, put it that way, Mike. And then in terms of the operating margins, well, I think really what we're looking at is more the impact of current inflation than the issues of sustainability, because we needed to go down this path at the time, and we will again update these numbers as we get into the project and we get into construction and commissioning, etc., etc. We estimated SASA around about a 5% increase in unit costs as a consequence of going to backfill paste and dry stack tailings, etc., etc.
Right, 5%. And at Kazakhstan, are you expecting sort of neutral at this stage? It sounds like, certainly from the solar work. And
it's neutral. It's not. There's no major increase. The biggest things on your cost increase at Kazakhstan will just be basic inflationary cost pressures. So we're having to pay more salaries. We're not seeing a major increase in electricity prices. I'll be honest with you at the moment. So, but there's consumables, and as I said before, that's running official headline figures at around about 18%.
Okay, thank you. One here from Steve Yelland. In terms of M&A, are you only looking in Central Asia?
No, we're a broad church on that one. I won't say we're completely agnostic. There's some countries we'd never look in, and we never have done, but it's broader than, I think in the Central Asian region, it is primarily Kazakhstan. We don't tend to look in the other stands, your Uzbekistans, your Kyrgyzstans, and those kind of places. We're not as comfortable in those countries, whereas we're comfortable in Kazakhstan. So it's focused on that in Kazakhstan. But apart from that, I'd say European time zones and African countries like Namibia, Botswana. It's difficult. You can't lump all the African countries into the same bracket, really. They're not all the same. Likewise, not all European countries are. But those are the kind of areas we're going to focus on. European time zones, so the European areas. We're in the Balkans at the moment. We'd look in Europe and we'd look in Africa. It's a tricky one to answer that, Mike, because there's something comes up that's in South America, and we have had operations in South America before, but I think at the moment it's politically quite challenging in South America for ourselves to add on to what we currently do in Europe and Kazakhstan.
Okay. Are you thinking in terms of future growth and opportunities, it will be sort of KOUNRAD or SASA lookalikes or similar, close matches to that kind of thing where you've developed some expertise?
Again, that's difficult to answer because they're not really similar, Mike. KOUNRAD is so different from SASA, both in terms of its output, so lead and zinc compared to copper, And one's you could say a waste retreatment facility almost. It's like in situ SXE dump, it's waste material effectively, and it's a great little project, very healthy margins. Whereas SASA is a more traditional underground mine, with the way you run an underground mine, effectively, and flotation and the rest of it. So no, I think we have to be, in my experience, growing a mining company is quite challenging, really, because you have to, as I tried to say before, be opportunistic. You look at all kinds of things, and each one, there'll be a flaw in each one, I can guarantee it, but you've got to look at it on the pros and cons, and you've got to do it such that you can manage those flaws, if you like, and get the best out of it and deliver on it. I often equate it to, it's not like we've got a great product here whereby we can just open another branch in Newcastle or Lancaster or Manchester and sell those great products and expand our market. You have to go where the geology is. You have to go in the countries that, the politics of the country, and that's the challenge, really, of trying to find the right opportunity. But certainly, we always look at the balance sheet, we always look at the dividend policy, we always look at the accretion for shareholders, and we always try and get into low-cost operations that we can manage and technically, deliver on the products and what have you.
Right, thank you. In fact, that's a partial answer, I think, to Colin Abrams' question here, which I just noticed. Do you feel that your KOUNRAD experience gives CAML some competitive advantage or special knowledge within the industry which could be applied in other projects on other sites? Are there other SXEW sites in the world which you are looking at, and related to that are most or all of the M&A deals mines or waste dumps? Yeah. Do you want to add anything to what you've just said in terms of answering that question?
No, I think it is a good question. I would say we haven't got, SXEW of itself is a quite well tried and tested path. About 30% of the world's copper comes from SXEW type processes, so it's not unique to us, certainly. But I do think as a company we have got a lot of experience and a lot of good skill set in terms of some of the staff that work for us on either consultancy basis or full time in leaching operations. I think we've established a real skill set there. Yeah. One of the challenges again in the mining world is getting resources, technical resources, technically trained people, and we've got some really good people. I think that gives us a good USP. Because there has been periods in the mining game whereby the bigger companies maybe haven't taken people on and trained them, so there's a bit of a shortage of skill set, and we need to address that ourselves together with the other mining companies. But I think we have got a bit of a USP there in some of the areas of leaching. Yes.
Okay, thank you. There's a related question here, which is almost a sort of the question from J.M. Robinson: what kind of new opportunity would you really like to get hold of, I suppose, if you were lucky? Jeremy Robinson in brackets. So what's your perfect project? If you had a dream about it, what would it look like?
Well, I can answer that fairly easily. I think my perfect project is KOUNRAD. If we could find another 2 or 3 of those, then that would be the perfect project, because there is a challenge, but as I mentioned before, we have a USP in delivering on those projects. But the chemistry, the metallurgy, the processing, the land conditions don't always lend themselves to what we've been fortunate at with KOUNRAD. If we can find another of those projects in Kazakhstan or Europe, then that will be the perfect project. I think it's very good from a sustainability angle because it's waste processing effectively.
Right.
So I think that would be the perfect project for us. And if it was in copper, that's probably the perfect metal for us, because I think the story around copper and the way the world will eventually go, it might have had a bit of a stalling recently, but it's certainly not going to change the direction of travel for the world in terms of the energy transition to renewables. Copper has got a great future.
Steve Yellen says, what is the main thing you learned from Copper Bay?
What's the main thing we learned from Copper Bay? That's a very good question, actually. We went into a country that is a long way off for a start off. I don't think it was as size. I don't think it's a bad project overall. It was almost waste reprocessing again. So it was tailings on a beach, effectively, was Copper Bay. So it would have been a similar kind of story, I think, to KOUNRAD. But the way of processing became a bit more complicated in terms of having to do both SXEW as well as flotation with the nature of the material that was there. So I think that's what made it difficult. And it was at the time when we were doing the feasibility study of it effectively that we came across the opportunity at SASA. And I think we recognized that we could get more value out of SASA by investing in that, which is a far bigger project and closer to home than the amount of time that it would have taken us to deliver and develop the Copper Bay project. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad project. And I do think over the years, Chile's become a harder country to invest in, certainly from an environmental standpoint, which I think would have been difficult to get it over the line. But, you know, it's not a bad project.
Okay, thank you. A couple here on the sort of political environment we find ourselves in at the moment. Is the political environment in Kazakhstan still a risk for the group? Well, I guess given what's going on in the Ukraine conflict at the moment and so on.
I get asked this a lot of the times, to be honest with you, Mike, I must admit, and it's difficult for me to answer because I don't fully know what's going on. I'm only informed by various political reports that we commission to get on a regular basis, and by we have a Kazakh NED on the board. Obviously, I've got my contacts in KOUNRAD, I've got my general director. Keep my ear to the ground, but you never fully know what's going on. But what I would say is there's two aspects to it. One is the unrest that happened earlier in the year in January, which is totally divorced from everything that's happened subsequently with Ukraine and Russia. So if we deal with that, first of all, that was a transition of power effectively between President Nazarbayev, who'd handed over to Tokayev back in, I think, 2019, I think it was. And maybe at the time we thought, well, that was a smooth transition of power. The reality was it hadn't happened at that time. It happened early January, I think, is a reality. And Tokayev is most definitely in charge. And most of the allies and people close to Nazarbayev are out of all the positions of power. And I think in that sense, Tokayev is trying to do the right things to make it a bit more transparent, a bit more open, a bit more decentralized from the powers that be, and less bureaucratic. He's got a big challenge on his hands to do it. But I think everything I read is that he's doing the right things. So that's the first answer to it. So I think that makes it a more investable country ultimately. What's happened subsequently in February with Ukraine and Russia has made his job even more difficult, because obviously he's got pressure from Russia effectively, and from Putin. But what he's trying to do is tread a tightrope whereby he's trying to appease both China, Russia, and the European Union in many ways, because their investments into Kazakhstan come from all of those angles. They always have done. It's part of the Silk Route. It's part of that, if you look at it geographically where it is, it does benefit from trade routes with China, Russia, and Europe. But you can't avoid the fact that it's part of the Russian influence, the former Soviet Union influence in terms of its economic unions and various security relationships it has with Belarus and Russia. So you can't avoid those, and those cannot be unblocked in a moment. So that is an elevation of risk, I would argue, yes, and you can't ignore that. But if you listen to all these pronouncements and everything they're trying to do in Kazakhstan, they're a very proud race, proud people, and over the 30 years that they've been independent, probably more now, actually 31 years, whatever it is, they've developed the Kazakh identity, and it's more Kazakhs who run the country than Russians and former Soviet Union people. So I think there's been a big change, a bit like same in Ukraine. I cannot sit here. It would be naive of me to answer the question and say political risk has not increased. Of course it's increased. How it's going to end up, I don't know myself, but I do think, we're comfortable operating there, and we haven't seen many ramifications of what's happened over the course of the year. Probably bigger ramifications from the unrest, and some of those I view in many ways as positive, because it might mean a greater kind of spread of the wealth of the country, which has always been between the oligarchs and those who have and those who haven't. There's a big disparity in Kazakhstan, and hopefully that will ease a bit as tax rates change a bit, and we may as a company suffer a little bit from. We will do undoubtedly suffer from slightly higher tax rates and have to pay staff more, but we're a very low cost operation, and that will maybe make it an easier jurisdiction to invest in for other investors, really.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And just from a logistical aspect, has the Ukraine war affected your ability to get copper to market at all?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. It has. We've had to change the route. It's not been a significant exercise. We pay a little bit more to take it straight through the Caspian now. We used to take it via, there was a small part of the route taking it out to Turkey, which is where nearly all of our copper goes to a Turkish wire manufacturer, and has done since we first started production, actually.
Right.
We paid some extra money with our off-taker to take it through the Caspian Sea, so it doesn't go across any of the Russian land effectively. So that's cost a little bit. It was a little bit bureaucratic and time-consuming at the time, but that's been the only real impact we've had of the Ukraine-Russian war. We haven't got many Russian suppliers. in either North Macedonia or Kazakhstan that we're dependent on. We can find alternative suppliers easily, and in fact that's what we do. We don't look to use any Russian suppliers at all. Really, we use alternatives.
Okay, thank you. Just one on getting a bit more personal here now. The questions. Robert Meadows wants to know how much skin you have personally in the game in terms of presumably shares you already own of CAML, etc.
Yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, we have a what, I don't know the exact percentage, Robert, but we have 175 million shares out at the moment. And my holding through my various options that I've gathered over the years, I've worked here now for nearly 15 years. My options and my what shares that when we did an IPO back in 2010, I got some put into an employee benefit trust. I've probably got around about just over 1 million shares in the game. So that's what, 0.5%, 0.6%. And
right.
some of the directors, my chairman, Nick, who's been with me throughout on this journey, hopefully a successful journey, has also got some skin in the game. But, we are rewarded as a management team based on KPIs linked into sustainability targets, production targets, operational targets, as are the rest of the management team here in this office here. So, there's not big percentages out to any of the managers at all, really.
Okay, thank you. And Tim Barker would like to know, he says you've been a very good leader, excellent compliment here to you that you've led the company well over the time that you've been at the helm. But without wishing to sound rude, he says, how long are you planning to stay?
Well, all I can say at the moment is I have no plans to leave.
No, okay.
I enjoy the people I work here. We've got some big challenges that I feel I need to deliver on. Certainly at SASA, I say big challenges. What I mean is delivering on the things that we committed to, in terms of the backfill plant, the dry stack tailings, changing the method of mining at SASA. And I'd like to see us acquire another asset. I think we have a good window of opportunity. We've got fairly long lives of assets, Mike, out to 2037, 2034, but that time goes quite quickly, as we all know. And
yep.
What I think is that you get below 10 years in the mining game, that can be quite a short period of time, really, because things take a gestation period. So I think we've got a window of opportunity to use the strong balance sheet we've got on cash flow generation in a fairly, becoming a bit of a depressed market in a recessionary period to actually grow our business. And I'd like to see all that through, really, before I decide to depart, so to speak.
Right. Okay. Sounds like you've got plans to stick around for a while. So it sounds like some of the listeners will be pleased to hear that. Just in terms of, I suppose, an adjunct to that, in terms of succession planning and so on, and talent management programs within the organization, what could you tell us anything about that? Because ultimately, I guess you and maybe other key people will be moving on or stepping down. Have you got a stable organization below that? Are you developing the talent? How are you doing it? And so on.
I think it's a very pertinent question. It is something that we're very wary of, both at the board level, and we have had changes of the board members fairly recently. And Nick, I know, has got a plan for recruiting more and keeping that fresh, so to speak, and keeping us as the executive management challenge. So we have succession planning in place there. And likewise, at my level and the senior management level, we are looking closely at succession management. We've taken on some pretty good, highly skilled people at SASA to deliver on that, and the way I phrase it to the board and the way I've sold it to the board is that we've kind of invested ahead of the time, really. We've probably got slightly more technical capability now necessarily than we need, but that's good because we're looking to grow the business. And as I said before, it is quite hard to get hold of technical people. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you reward them well, you remunerate them well, you look after them, and that they stay loyal to the business because they're a key asset. And therefore, I think, in terms of, I would bracket that as part of our succession planning for the technical skills in the business. When we set up this business, it was effectively myself, and my background's as I was in the Royal Navy, and then I'm an accountant, so I'm not the technical guy. It was really Nick Clark, who's the chairman now, and Howard Nicholson, who helped us develop the KOUNRAD project. So as they become slightly older and look at retiring in the near future or whatever, we need to replace those skills, and they're the hardest skills in my humble opinion. They're the hardest skills to replace, the technical skills. So we have to bring people on board, reward them adequately, train them, keep them loyal to the business, and they'll be the future. That's the succession planning. That's the hard bit of the succession planning, I think.
But you feel that you've got those people in place. It's a matter of retaining and motivating them over the next few years.
I think we reward very well for success, you know, based on capabilities, like I mentioned before. And I think we've got some good people over the past, I'd say probably 12 months. We've spent quite a lot of time. We've taken on we never had a HR manager, for example. We've got a group HR manager, and a lot of her time has been, you know, scouting the market for the best skills. Primarily to help us at SASA at the moment, because I think KOUNRAD's pretty stable and we've got a good skill set there. And as I said before, we have no expats at KOUNRAD. We've trained all the local staff to manage that project very well for us, and they do a great job of that, I have to say. But because it's a lot of change management and a lot of new skills and technology, you do undoubtedly need people who've had that experience in other mining countries, in, you know, be it Australia, South Africa, or Europe, or wherever. So you need to use that, and you need to train the locals such that they can hopefully ultimately be 100% locals at SASA. But then you're going to go on to another project, and developing a project, you'll need that skill set in your succession planning from a corporate technical team to be able to deliver on those projects. Really.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you for that, Nigel. Just looking, we've had a couple of late questions come in. Colin says, I think your slide said that you had engaged a consultant on one M&A possibility in H1. How many times in recent years have you got to this stage, i.e. post NDA and engaging a consultant?
Do you know, the honest answer is I can't remember. I certainly couldn't give you a number, but we only go to, I mean, we'll use consultants at different phases when we're looking at things from a, you know, be a technical angle that we don't understand fully ourselves, be it whatever. So it's a difficult question to answer, but all I can say is we haven't got beyond that stage whereby there's anything to announce, or we're at that stage at the moment. So.
Okay, one minor thing, and then we're done, I think, is Colin would also like to know, you mentioned a 12-year KOUNRAD life expectancy. Is that because your license runs out, or you will have exhausted the waste dumps? And if it's the former, would you expect to extend the license?
No, I think the two are coincidental with each other. First of all, the license does expire August 2034, but our planning in terms of those leach curves I showed before would, in theory, show the dumps exhausted at those 35 to 42% recovery and 50% in the east. The reality is that it's not, and Nick, my chairman, would always say this, it's not an exact science. We may well get to 53, 54, 55% in the east, or maybe, you know, more than 42% in the west. And indeed, we are doing in the east already. So there will be, you know, leachable material, but all our planning is based on 2034, and effectively it will be exhausted. But I suspect if we can extend the license, we'll still be producing at KOUNRAD, but maybe not at the levels that we currently are.
Okay, all right. Thanks very much, Nigel.